March 14, 1943. Rabaul, New Britain. The Japanese pilot from Nagoya chuckled when he spotted the American bomber through his canopy glass. Another A-20 Havoc dragging itself along at 8,000 feet like a slow goose waiting to be taken. He had downed 2 last month. Easy work. The Americans called them attack bombers, but Lieutenant Yamamoto called them moving targets. He rocked his wings toward his wingman and pushed the stick forward, diving from 12,000 feet with the sun behind him. The A-20 hadn't noticed him yet. They never did until it was already too late. The pilot from Texas in the A-20's nose sensed them, coming before anyone else. Sergeant Jim Baker felt that same chill again, the one that saved him over Buna 2 weeks earlier, like someone walking over his grave. He scanned the sky through the plexiglass nose cone, squinting into the morning sun. Nothing, yet the feeling grew stronger. His grandmother in Houston always said he had a gift. In Texas, it meant sensing storms. In the air, it meant sensing death diving at 400 miles per hour. Then he saw them. 2 dots dropping out of the sun, swelling larger every second. Zeros. His throat dried like dust. He hit the intercom. Bandits 2 o'clock high. Coming fast. The pilot, Captain Steve Morrison from Ohio, reacted instantly. Full throttle, nose down, trying to squeeze more speed out of the plane. The A-20 wasn't built to fight. It was made to carry 4,000 pounds of bombs and head home. First, they had to live through the next 60 seconds. Yamamoto grinned as the A-20 dove. They always tried to flee. It only delayed the end by a few seconds. He lined the bomber up in his sights, waiting until it closed to 400 yards. His 20mm cannons would rip the American plane apart like thin paper. He had seen it many times. The skin peeled away, the engines caught fire, and the crew either burned or jumped. Most burned. At 300 yards, he pulled the trigger. Nothing. The cannons had jammed, both of them. Yamamoto spat a curse and switched to his 7.7 machine guns. But he was closing too fast now, flying past the diving bomber. As he shot by, something unbelievable happened. The A-20's nose burst with light like the 4th of July. 8.50 caliber guns roared at once, joined by the twin .50 seconds in the dorsal turret. 10 heavy machine guns firing together, each spitting out 800 rounds a minute. The math was simple and horrifying. More than 2,000 rounds filled the air where Yamamoto had been a heartbeat earlier. His wingman wasn't so lucky. Lieutenant Tanaka from Osaka flew straight into the storm of lead. 10 guns struck his zero at the same moment. The engine blew first, then the fuel tank. The fighter didn't simply break apart, it vanished, turning from airplane to cloud of scraps in under 2 seconds. Tanaka never had time to shout. One moment alive, the next just smoke and burning metal falling toward the Solomon Sea, 5,000 feet below. Baker kept firing even after the zero blew apart. His 8 nose guns devoured ammunition at a crazy pace. Each one fired 13 rounds per second. The sound wasn't just loud, it was a physical hit that shook his ribs and rattled his teeth. Hot brass rained around his boots. The whole nose vibrated so hard he could barely see the sights. Still he fired, walking his tracers toward Yamamoto's zero as it tried climbing away. The bullets connected. .50 caliber rounds punched through the zero's tail, each one leaving a hole as big as a baseball. Japanese fighters were built for speed, not strength. No armor, no self-sealing tanks. Every pound saved meant better climb, better range. It also meant that when heavy American rounds hit, the results were devastating. Yamamoto felt his rudder go slack. Then his elevator. The control stick turned limp in his hands. Morrison leveled the A-20 at 3,000 feet, the airframe creaking under the strain. 4 Gs pushed them into their seats. The plane shuddered from its own endless gunfire. They had fired more than 2,000 rounds in under a minute. The ammo was nearly done, but the damage was done too. Out the window, he watched Yamamoto's Zero trailing smoke in a helpless spiral. The Japanese pilot was fighting to control his dying machine, but physics didn't care about honor or duty. Yamamoto knew it was over. The American guns had wrecked his control surfaces. He was flying a 12,000-pound brick. The engine still turned, but without rudder or elevator, he might as well have no controls at all. The ocean rushed closer. He thought of his wife in Nagoya, expecting their first child, a child who would grow up without him. He had pictured dying in glorious combat, taking Americans with him. Instead, he would crash into the sea because he underestimated a bomber's teeth. The Zero struck the water at 200 miles per hour. The hit was like smashing into concrete. The plane flipped twice, losing wings and engine before the remaining shell sank within seconds. Yamamoto was likely dead before the ocean closed over him. If not, he had maybe 10 seconds before the Pacific filled his lungs. Either way, his war was finished. His last thought, if he had one, was probably shock that the slow American bomber had teeth. Sharp ones that fired 2,400 rounds per minute. Morrison turned the A-20 toward home, carefully guiding the damaged bomber through thick clouds. They had lost hydraulic fluid, and the left engine was running rough, but they were still alive. Baker checked his guns, counting what was left. Maybe 300 rounds total. One more Zero could have ended them, but there were no more Zeros. Not today. The Japanese pilots at Rabaul would think twice before laughing at A-20s again. Word would spread in their ready rooms. The American bombers were not helpless targets. They were flying gun platforms that could turn a fighter into scraps in seconds. 6 months later and 3,000 miles away, that lesson would be repeated. This time in the skies over North Africa, where German pilots were making the same deadly mistake about American fighters. The P-40 Warhawk was seen as outdated by 1,943. Too slow to chase the Messerschmitt Bf. 109. Couldn't climb with the Focke-Wulf. 190. Turned like a truck next to the agile German fighters. Luftwaffe pilots called them 40 killers because they were so easy to shoot down. At least, that's what they bragged about in the officers' mess at Tunis. September 3, 1943, Tunisia. Captain Heinrich Müller from Hamburg was leading 4 Bf. 109s on a sweep south of Tunis. They were hunting American supply convoys, but Müller secretly wanted P-40s. He needed 2 more kills to reach 30. Enough for the Knight's Cross. His girlfriend in Berlin had promised to marry him once he earned it. The medal meant a promotion, better postings, maybe even a return to Germany as an instructor. All he needed were 2 more American planes. When his wingman spotted 6 P-40s below, Müller felt like it was Christmas. The American flight leader was Lieutenant Tom Rodriguez from Los Angeles. He had been flying P-40s for 8 months and already had 3 German kills. Not an ace yet, but close. He knew exactly what the Warhawk could and couldn't do. It couldn't climb with a Messerschmitt. It couldn't turn with one either. But it could do 2 things better than any German fighter: dive and shoot. The P-40 was heavy, which made it slow to climb but unbelievably fast going down. And those 6.50 caliber guns in the wings could rip apart anything the Germans flew. Rodriguez saw the Germans first. 4 Bf 109s diving from 15,000 feet. Perfect. Let them come. He rocked his wings to warn his flight, then eased into a shallow climb, making it look like they were trying to get away. The Germans would see scared Americans running. What they wouldn't see was the trap. Rodriguez had learned the trick from the Flying Tigers in China. Let the enemy think they have you. Let them fully commit. then show them what 650s could do to metal and flesh. Muller fell for it. The Americans were climbing running. Typical. They always ran when they saw German fighters. He shoved the throttle forward, diving at 400 miles per hour. His Bf-109 carried two 30mm guns in the nose and a 20mm cannon firing through the prop hub. More than enough to shred a P-40. He had done it 8 times already. The American planes were tough, he admitted that. They could take damage that would destroy a Japanese Zero, but they couldn't take what he was about to give them. At 800 yards, Rodriguez suddenly rolled inverted and pulled hard, dropping straight down. His flight followed. The move was brutal. 5Gs draining blood from their heads. Rodriguez's vision narrowed, the edges turning gray, but he held it, counting seconds. The P-40 picked up speed fast. 400 miles per hour, 450. The needle bounced at 500. The whole aircraft shuddered like it was tearing apart, but it held. Curtiss built them like flying tanks. Muller cursed. The Americans had flipped and dove straight down. No German pilot would try that. It was suicide. But Americans were known for being reckless. He rolled to follow, but the Bf-109 wasn't made for such a dive. The wings fluttered. The controls turned soft. At 450 miles per hour, he had to level out or risk losing the entire plane. The P-40s kept diving, pulling away from him. Then, at the bottom of the dive, something unbelievable happened. The Americans pulled out suddenly and shot straight back upward toward the German fighters. Rodriguez had timed it perfectly. The P-40s used their dive speed like rockets, shooting upward through the German formation at a combined closing speed of 800 miles per hour. As they passed, all 6 American fighters opened fire at once, 36.50 caliber machine guns roaring together. The sky turned into a wall of tracers, a curtain of fire and metal. The Germans flew right into it. There was nowhere to turn, no time to dodge, only physics, bullets, and the hard truth that they had been tricked. Muller's wingman suffered first. Lieutenant Fritz Bauer from Munich flew straight into the crossing point of 3 P-4OS fire. 18 heavy guns aimed at one spot. His Bf-109 stood no chance. The engine block blew apart. The propeller spun off like a tossed disc. The wings folded backward. The cockpit vanished in a burst of metal, glass, and red mist. Bauer died before his mind could understand what hit him. The remains of his fighter scattered across the desert in 1,000 pieces. The second German fighter lost its entire left wing cut off clean by focused .50 caliber fire, like a surgeon's knife. The plane snap-rolled wildly, pulling 12 Gs, crushing the pilot into his seat. His spine broke in 3 places. He died instantly, though his hand stayed locked on the stick, holding the plane in its death spiral all the way down. It struck the desert floor at nearly 300 miles per hour, carving a crater 20 feet deep and 60 feet wide. Muller somehow made it through the wall of gunfire with only light damage. Holes tore through his wings and fuselage, but nothing essential was hit. The third German pilot wasn't so lucky. American rounds smashed into his fuel tank. The Bf-109 had self-sealing tanks, but .50 caliber bullets were larger than the system could handle. Fuel sprayed across the cockpit. The pilot, a 20-year-old from Dresden named Erich Hoffmann, had 2 seconds to realize he was covered in gasoline before a tracer found the vapor. The explosion was instant and complete. The fighter became a fireball, burning at 2,000. Hoffmann never felt pain. The flames took him before a single nerve signal reached his brain. Rodriguez pulled his P-40 over the top of the climb, rolled inverted, and scanned for more targets. 3 German fighters were falling toward the sands. The 4th was fleeing, diving away at full speed. He thought about chasing him but chose not to. Let him run. Let him spread the story at base. Let him explain how 6 obsolete American fighters had torn apart 3 of Germany's best in under 10 seconds. Let the fear move through the Luftwaffe-ready rooms. Muller returned to Tunis with 43 bullet holes in his aircraft. The mechanics counted them twice, unable to believe a plane could fly with so much damage. Muller never flew combat again, not because he was hurt. He hadn't taken a single scratch. But something inside him had snapped. The absolute belief that German pilots and German machines were superior. He had watched 3 friends die in moments, ripped apart by American guns he'd been told were weak. He started drinking. Within a month, he was sent back to Germany. Officially a training post, but everyone knew the truth. He had lost his nerve. The Americans and their P-40s had broken him. The P-40's reputation changed after that fight. Word spread on both sides. American pilots began calling their planes flying destroyers. The Germans stopped laughing and started respecting. Orders came from Luftwaffe Command. Engage P-40s only with height advantage and in larger numbers. Never chase them into a dive. Never assume they are retreating. 6.50 caliber guns could cut a Messerschmitt's wings off in seconds. Physics didn't respect ideology. Bullets were bullets, and the Americans had plenty. Through late 1943 and into 1944, the lesson kept being written in blood. In Italy, German pilots learned that American B-25 Mitchell bombers carried 14.50 caliber guns. 14. A Focke-Wulf pilot from Stuttgart named Wilhelm Kron attacked one near Anzio. The Mitchells. Gunners fired 800 rounds into his fighter in 4 seconds. The engines tore off the fuselage. Both wings folded back. Kron managed to bail out, but his parachute was shredded by the same guns that destroyed his plane. He fell 6,000 feet, conscious the whole way. Knowing exactly how many seconds he had left to live out by early 1944. Even the once feared Messerschmitt Bf-109 struggled to survive. The fighter that ruled European skies since 1939 was being hunted by American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts. The Germans kept upgrading it, bigger engines, heavier guns, more armor, but each change made it heavier, slower, and less agile. The Bf-109K could barely climb faster than the American fighters it was supposed to defeat. German pilots started calling it the flying brick. The truth was harsh and simple. The war had moved beyond the Bf-109. It was designed in 1935. When fighters carried 2 machine guns and fought at 200 mph. By 1944, American fighters carried 8.50 caliber guns and fought at 400 miles per hour. The Bf-109's narrow landing gear meant for grass fields collapsed on bomb-scarred runways. Its range, fine for battles over France, couldn't protect bombers deep inside Germany. Its armament, deadly against early war biplanes, bounced off American armor plating April 14, 1944, over Bavaria. Major Kurt Steinberg from Frankfurt led the last operational squadron of Bf-109 G6 models. 24 planes took off to attack American bombers. 6 returned. Steinberg watched his men die one after another, crushed by the unbelievable firepower of American escorts. A P-47 Thunderbolt dived on his Wingman 8.50 caliber guns firing together. The Bf-109 disintegrated. Not crashed, not blew up, disintegrated. One moment it was an airplane, the next it was confetti. Steinberg survived only by fleeing. Simply fleeing, diving away, using every trick he had learned in 5 years of war to escape American gunfire. He had begun the war as a knight of the air, fighting clean duels in the sky. He ended it hiding in clouds, praying American radar wouldn't spot him. His Bf-109, once the pride of the Luftwaffe, was reduced to lurking at the edges of battles, searching for wounded bombers to finish off. Even that was deadly. American bombers flew in tight boxes, covering each other with overlapping fire. Attack one, and you faced dozens of .50 caliber guns. The mechanic from Ohio who serviced Steinberg's plane knew the truth, even if the major wouldn't say it out loud. The Bf-109 was finished, not just. This plane wasn't just damaged, it was finished. And not just this one, but the whole idea behind it. The war had changed, and the Bf-109 hadn't changed with it. American factories were building P-51 Mustangs that could fly all the way to Berlin and return, fighting the whole time. They carried enough ammunition for 20 minutes of combat. They had bubble canopies so pilots could see in every direction. Their cockpits were warm and comfortable at high altitude. German pilots, meanwhile, sat cramped inside freezing Bf-109 cockpits. They constantly stared at fuel gauges and ammo counters, knowing they had maybe 1 minute of fighting time before needing to escape. By December 1944, the Luftwaffe was so desperate it began forcing teenagers into the cockpit. 16-year-olds with only 20 hours of flying experience were put into Bf-109s in order to ram American bombers. They didn't even have enough fuel for a real dogfight. The most advanced fighter of the 1930s had become a suicide weapon with a child inside it. Christmas Eve 1944, a boy from Dresden climbed into a Bf-109 for the first time. He had never even fired its guns in training. There wasn't enough ammunition. He took off with orders to ram a B-17 bomber. But he never found one. Instead, American P-51s found him. The American pilots later said it wasn't even a fight. The boy flew straight and level, frozen with fear or simply not knowing what else to do. They fired 200 rounds into his plane, quick and clean. Better that than burning alive during a ramming attack. When the war ended in May 1945, thousands of Bf-109s were left abandoned. The fighter that once ruled European skies was now scrap metal. Many were bulldozed into pits and buried. Others were melted down and turned into pots and pans. A few were taken by the Americans, British, and Soviets for testing. But most were left to rust in empty fields, where farmers eventually used them as chicken coops and storage sheds. It should have been the end of the story. The Bf-109 was outdated. Jets were the new rulers of the sky, the American F-80. The British Gloucester Meteor, even Germany itself had flown the Me-262 jet near the end of the war. Propeller fighters were old history now, but history has a sense of humor. The Bf-109 wasn't done yet. Spain had used Bf-109s during their civil war and continued building them under license. When Germany collapsed, Spain kept the production lines alive. They could no longer get German engines, so they did something wild. They installed British Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engines that powered the Spitfire and the P-51 Mustang. The irony was unbelievable. German fighter built to destroy British planes was now powered by a British engine. The Spanish version was called the Hispano Aviation. HA-112. It looked like a Messerschmitt but sounded like a Spitfire. Spanish pilots said it was actually better than the German version. The Merlin engine was more reliable, smoother, and caught fire far less often. Spanish mechanics joked that the British had finally fixed the Bf-109. German engineers who heard about this were furious. But Spain didn't care. They had a fighter that worked. Then, in 1948, something even stranger happened. The new state of Israel desperately needed military aircraft. They bought 25 Bf-109s from Czechoslovakia, which had been building them during and after the war. Their version was called the Avia S-199, and it was awful. The Czechs had run out of proper German engines and replaced them with weaker Czech engines. The planes were nose-heavy, dangerous on takeoff, and killed more Israeli pilots in training than the Arab pilots did in combat. But Israel had no other choice. They were being attacked by 5 Arab armies. Egyptian Spitfires were strafing Tel Aviv. Syrian planes bombed villages. Israel would have flown crop dusters with machine guns if that's all they had. The Israeli pilots called the Czech 109s Sakin, the knife, or simply the mule, because they were stubborn and hard to control. On May 29, 1948, over Tel Aviv, an Israeli pilot named Modi Alan, who had flown for the RAF, took off in an S-199 to intercept 2 Egyptian Spitfires attacking the city. Think about that. A Jewish pilot flying a German-designed fighter built in Czechoslovakia, defending Israel from Egyptian pilots flying British Spitfires. If this were fiction, no one would believe it. But it happened. Alan shot down both Spitfires, becoming the first fighter ace in Israeli history. A plane designed for Nazi Germany had just protected the Jewish homeland. Israeli pilots survived the S-199 by learning its deadly habits the hard way. Take off with full right rudder or the torque would flip you. Land at exactly 95 miles per hour, too fast and you'd crash. Too slow and you'd stall. Never trust the engine in a dive, it might quit suddenly. The plane killed 7 Israeli pilots, but it also gave Israel air power in the most critical months of the war. Arab pilots learned to fear the strange silhouette. They had no idea the planes were barely holding together. By 1950, Israel had better fighters, P-51 Mustangs and Spitfires, and the Czech 109s were retired and sold for scrap. Most were melted, but the Israeli Air Force kept one as a memorial. It sits in a museum today. German fighter plane that helped create the State of Israel. Elderly survivors sometimes stand in front of it and cry. No. One knows exactly why elderly survivors cry when they stand in front of that museum aircraft. Maybe they're remembering the Holocaust. Maybe the War of Independence. No one asks. Meanwhile, in a twist that would have made Goebbels choke on his cyanide, Finland was still flying Bf-109s as frontline fighters. They had received them from Germany during the war and maintained them with incredible skill. Finnish mechanics, people used to keeping machines alive through brutal Arctic winters, made maintenance almost an art. They modified the engines for cold weather, improved the heating, and somehow kept 60-year-old aircraft flying into the 1950s. Finnish pilots loved them. After years of flying Soviet planes during their uneasy alliance with the USSR, the German fighters felt like sports cars. And the Finnish pilot from Helsinki, who flew the very last Bf-109 mission in March 1954, likely had no idea he was closing a chapter in history. He was just flying a normal patrol along the Soviet border. The Bf-109 G6 beneath him was 18 years old, rebuilt 4 times, assembled from parts of 12 different airframes, but it still flew. The engine still roared. The guns, untouched since 1944, were still loaded. He landed after 90 minutes, logged the flight, and walked away. No ceremony. No moment of reflection. The era simply ended quietly. But the story still wasn't over. In the 1960s, something bizarre happened. A British film studio making the Battle of Britain needed real German fighters for the movie. Genuine Bf-109s were nearly extinct, and the few museum pieces were too fragile to fly. Then someone remembered Spain. The Spanish Air Force still had their Merlin-powered 109s in storage. Would they sell them? For the right price, Spain would sell anything. The film company bought 50 Hispano Aviation HA-112s Bf-109s with British engines to play the role of German fighters attacking Britain. Everyone saw the irony. The British pilots hired to fly these Messerschmitt Spitfire hybrids reported that they handled beautifully, in some ways even better than the originals. The Merlin engine made them reliable like Spitfires, but they still turned sharply like Messerschmitts. One former RAF squadron leader said it felt like flying a fighter that could have existed if all the nations had shared their best technology instead of trying to kill each other. But that isn't how history works. During filming, one of these Spanish 109s crashed in Ireland. The pilot survived, but the plane was destroyed. Local farmers collected the wreckage as souvenirs. A German fighter with a British engine, owned by Spain, flown by an Irishman, pretending to attack Britain, crashing in Ireland, ended up partly decorating local pubs. If you have a drink at Flanagan's in County Wicklow, you're sitting under a piece of a Bf-109 propeller. The farmers who found it have no idea what it really is. They only know it came from a war movie made in 1968. Then, in the 1970s, came the real twist. Wealthy collectors began buying old military planes not to put in museums, but to fly. They wanted to sit where Luftwaffe aces once sat. They wanted to feel what combat pilots felt. But real Bf-109s were nearly impossible to find. The few survivors were museum pieces or wrecks. So someone had a wild idea. Why not build new ones? Not replicas, real Bf-109s built from original blueprints. It sounded insane. It was also brilliant. A company in Germany began the project in 1982. They found original blueprints hidden in an attic in Munich. They located old Messerschmitt factory tools stored in a warehouse in Augsburg. They even tracked down former workers, old men in their 70s, who remembered how the planes were built. First newly built Bf-109 flew in 1991. It used a modern American engine. Because the original Daimler-Benz engines no longer existed. But everything else was authentic. Even the narrow landing gear that had killed so many German pilots. The test pilot was a 73-year-old former Luftwaffe pilot who had flown 109s in combat. He hadn't flown in 20 years. But when he climbed into the cockpit, his body remembered. He started the engine, felt the familiar vibration, smelled the oil and fuel. For a moment, he was 20 again, taking off from a grass airfield in France. Then reality came back. This wasn't 1943. His friends were gone. The war was over. He was an old man flying an old machine for wealthy collectors who would never understand what it had meant. He flew for 30 minutes, gentle turns, nothing heroic. When reporters asked how it felt, he thought for a long moment before saying something that translated to, like dancing with a ghost. He never flew again. Younger pilots took over, men without memories of war. Men who could fly the Bf-109 without ghosts sitting beside them. Today, in 2024, there are more flyable Bf-109s than at any time since the mid-1950s. Collectors spend millions restoring wrecks dug out of Norwegian fjords and Russian swamps. Spain sold its remaining HA-112s to collectors who converted them back to German specifications. The Czech Republic found a warehouse full of S-199 parts and sold them to RESTORERS. There are around 30 flyable Bf-109s in the world now. Millionaires bring them to air shows. Crowds cheer when they start their engines. People take photos, buy souvenirs, and explain to their children that this was a famous German fighter, but they don't truly understand. They see a beautiful machine, elegant, fast, deadly. They don't see the 18-year-old from Hamburg who burned alive in his cockpit. They don't see the Jewish pilot using one to defend Tel Aviv. They don't see the finish. mechanic keeping one flying through an Arctic winter with salvaged parts and pure determination. At an air show in Wisconsin last year, a restored Bf-109 G6 flew beside a P-51D Mustang. The announcer called it a symbol of old enemies now at peace. The crowd applauded, but the 98-year-old American veteran in the stands did not. He remembered when that wasn't a display. When those two planes meeting meant one of them was about to die. He watched the Bf-109 make a low pass, its Merlin engine roaring. Even the authentic restorations use British engines now. The irony never ends. His hands shook, not because of age, but because of memory, because of old fear. His grandson asked if he wanted to meet the pilot or take a photo with the plane. The old man shook his head. A plane like that had killed his best friend over Berlin in 1945, shot him down, watched him burn. The German pilot was probably doing his duty. The American pilot certainly was. Both were boys, really. Scared boys trying to kill each other with machines they barely understood. Now one had been dead for 79 years, and the other was watching his killer's aircraft fly loops for entertainment. The restoration world has created a strange economy around the Bf-109. Original parts sell for thousands. A genuine Bf-109 gunsight costs more than most cars. A real engine, if you can even find one, sells for $500,000. There's a man in New Zealand who makes reproduction Bf-109 propellers. He's backed up for 3 years. A company in Texas makes replica cockpit instruments and ships them worldwide to collectors who want their warbirds as authentic as possible. As if authenticity still exists when the original context is gone. The strangest part is where these restored Bf-109s end up. There's one in Japan owned by a businessman born in Hiroshima 3 years after the bomb. There's one in Israel flying with the Star of David on the wings, the ultimate historical twist. There's one in Russia owned by an oligarch whose grandfather died fighting the Wehrmacht. These aircraft that once symbolized Nazi power now belong to anyone with enough money. History has become a product, but maybe the most unusual Bf-109 story happened in 2018. A farmer in Denmark was clearing a field when his plow hit something metal. It was a Bf-109F4 that had crash-landed in 1943. The pilot survived, was captured, and lived until 2001. The farmer contacted aviation archaeologists, who carefully dug up the aircraft. It was shockingly well preserved by the Danish peat bog. Inside the cockpit, they found the pilot's lunch, black bread, and sausage still recognizable after 75 years. They also found a photograph. A young woman smiling in front of a house in Stuttgart. Researchers tracked her down. She was 93, living in a Munich nursing home. She had married the pilot after the war. They had 4 children, 11 grandchildren. She had thought that photo was lost forever. When they showed it to her, she cried, not out of sadness, but something deeper. The photo was from before the bombs, before her city was destroyed, before her brother died on the Eastern Front, before her husband came home from a British prison camp a changed man. The Bf-109 had preserved a moment from a world that no longer existed. The Danish farmer donated the aircraft to a museum, but before the restoration team finished, they made one last discovery. The plane's guns were still loaded. 400 rounds of ammunition, ready to fire after 3/4 of a century. The bullets were corroded but intact, each one designed to kill Allied airmen. Now they sit in a glass case beside the aircraft. School children on field trips ask what they are. The guide says they're bullets, but the children don't understand. How could they? They grew up in a world where Germany and Britain are allies, where Americans have bases in Japan, where Israeli pilots train with Germans. last month. The last surviving German Bf-109 combat pilot died. He was 101 and had shot down 17 Allied aircraft. In his final interview, recorded a week before he passed, he was asked about the Bf-109. He thought silently for a long time, then said, "It was a tool like a hammer or a saw. We used it to try to stop the bombers destroying our cities. The Americans used their P-50s to protect those bombers." Both sides thought they were right. Both sides were boys trying to survive. The planes didn't care about politics. They flew or crashed based only on physics and pilot skill. He paused and added, "I see them at air shows now. These restored 109's rich men's toys. They fly them gently. We flew them at the edge of destruction, pushing them until they broke. We had to. Our lives depended on finding that edge. These collectors will never find it. They don't want to. They want to own history without living it. But you can't own history. It owns you. Every time I close my eyes, I see those American bombers. I see my friends burning. I see the fighters that killed them. The Bf-109 wasn't a beautiful machine to us. It was life or death on wings. Today, there's a company in China building Bf-109 replicas, not restorations, but newly built copies for collectors. They use modern engines, modern avionics, modern materials. They're safer, more reliable, easier to fly than the originals. They look exactly like Bf-109s. But they aren't. They're what the Bf-109 would be if it were. Designed in 2020 instead of 1935. The Chinese workers building them have no connection to the history. They simply follow blueprints and meet specifications. One worker, asked about building German fighters, shrugged and said through a translator, "It's just a job." Yesterday. It's a ghost in the sky, a silhouette torn out of another century. A reminder that the past never really dies, it just changes altitude. People at air shows point their phones at it, marvel at its speed, its shape, its sound. They cheer when it banks, gasp when it climbs, applaud when it lands. But the Bf-109 was never meant to be applauded. It was meant to hunt, to kill, to defend cities now filled with tourists and coffee shops, to intercept bombers whose surviving crew now sit in lawn chairs watching its gentle aerobatics. A machine built to fight a war that no longer exists has become a symbol of a history most people no longer truly feel. The pilots who knew what it meant are almost all gone. The mechanics who bled over its engines are gone. The civilians who hid from its shadow are gone. All that remains are stories, scattered parts, and a shape in the sky that once made hearts stop. Maybe that's why the Bf-109 endures. Because it forces us to remember. Not the flags, not the speeches, not the grand strategies of generals, but the human cost. The boys in cockpits. The families waiting at home. The cities burning. The future's stolen dot in a hangar somewhere tonight. A restored Bf-109 sits under soft lights, polished to mirror shine. Its tires are new, its hydraulic lines modern, its engine rebuilt with parts from 3 countries. A billionaire will fly it this weekend, wave to the crowd. Sign autographs. But if you sit in that hangar alone, with the lights off and listen closely, the past leaks through the metal. You can almost hear the cold wind over the Russian front. You can almost hear the sirens in London. You can almost hear the terrified breath of an 18-year-old pilot climbing into the cockpit for the first and last time. Bf-109 is no longer a weapon. It's no longer a threat. It's no longer a symbol of anything. Except what history does to us all. It turns death into memory. Memory into story. And story into something we watch on a sunny afternoon, forgetting or trying to forget what it once meant. And maybe that's the final irony of the Bf-109. It outlived the dream it was built to serve. The nation that forged it, the men who flew it, and the wars that defined it. It survived everything in Jep time. More stories like this, stories of survival, of machines, of people caught between ingenuity and destruction. History isn't just dates and facts. It's the sound of a P-40 diving, the roar of a Merlin engine, the silence after a Bf-109 goes down. It's the weight of a life lost in a cockpit, and the echo of that loss across decades. When you see these aircraft today, remember, you are looking at more than engineering. You are looking at memory-made metal, courage wrapped in aluminum, and the terrible beauty of what humans are capable of when the stakes are life and death. So watch them fly. Study them, admire them, but never forget what they were built for. Because behind every propeller, every wing, every rivet, there is a story of survival, of horror, and of the boys who were only ever trying to make it home. And that, perhaps, is the only way to truly honor them.